The first thing I noticed wasn't the wine on the floor. It was my wife's wedding ring. After 42 years of marriage, I know exactly how Eleanor wears it. She twists it with her thumb whenever she's nervous. She takes it off only twice a day, once while kneading dough for her Sunday bread, and once before bed when her arthritis flares up. That night it was covered in red wine, and somehow that bothered me more than anything else I saw when I opened my front door. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm 68 years old and have spent the last 36 years managing one of the largest furniture manufacturing companies in Louisville, Kentucky. I retired 2 years ago, or at least I tried to. The truth is, I still work 3 days a week because sitting still has never been something I learned how to do. My wife, Eleanor, says I was born 60 years old. She's probably right. We've been married for 42 years. She raised our son, Daniel, while I spent too many late nights building a business I hoped would one day become his. She packed his school lunches, sat through every baseball game, stayed awake whenever he came home late from college, and somehow she still managed to make me feel like the luckiest man alive every single day. If you ask me what Eleanor Bennett looks like today, I won't tell you she's 65 years old. I'll tell you she still smiles with her entire face whenever she laughs, that she still puts extra butter on my toast even after my doctor specifically asked her not to, and that she still kisses my forehead every morning before I leave the house. That's my wife, the woman I came home to on her knees. It was a Friday evening in late September. I'd spent most of the day at our company's annual charity fundraiser and decided to stop by the office afterward to sign a few remaining documents. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was nearly 8:30. The lights in our dining room were glowing through the front windows. I smiled to myself, because Friday dinners had always been important in our family. Then I noticed 6 unfamiliar luxury cars parked outside my house. Daniel's black Mercedes was there. My daughter-in-law, Victoria's white Lexus, sat beside it, and judging by the remaining vehicles, I immediately knew her parents were visiting. Good, I thought. Eleanor loves hosting family dinners. I walked inside expecting to hear her laughing from the kitchen. Instead, I heard Victoria's voice. Honestly, she's so stubborn sometimes. Everyone laughed. Then I stepped into my dining room and stopped walking altogether. Victoria's parents were seated comfortably at my dining table enjoying dinner. Crystal wine glasses, fine china, candlelight. My son sat at the head of the table smiling as if he owned the house. And my wife? My wife was on her knees in the middle of the dining room floor, scrubbing spilled red wine from our Persian rug with an old kitchen towel. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had walked into the wrong house. Then Eleanor looked up at me. She smiled, but there was something terribly wrong with her smile. It wasn't Eleanor's smile. It was the smile of a woman desperately trying to convince everyone in the room that everything was perfectly fine, when it clearly wasn't. And that's when I noticed the bruise beginning to form beneath her left eye. I didn't say a word when I walked into that dining room. 42 years of marriage teaches you something most people don't understand. When you truly know someone, you learn to hear the things they don't say. And my wife was screaming without making a sound. "Richard!" Daniel stood up immediately, forcing a smile onto his face. "We didn't know you'd be home this early." This early? I glanced at the grandfather clock hanging in our dining room. It was almost 9 at night. Victoria smiled politely and raised her wine glass. "Mr. Bennett, Eleanor insisted on helping with dinner. You know how she is. She simply won't sit still." "Helping?" My wife was 75% finished scrubbing red wine out of an $8,000 Persian rug with her bare hands, while 6 adults sat comfortably eating filet mignon. I slowly took off my coat and hung it beside the door. "Eleanor," I said softly, "stand up, sweetheart." She immediately shook her head. "Oh no, Richard, I'm almost done." No, that wasn't right. Eleanor Bennett has never, in 42 years of marriage, called me Richard when she's upset. It's always been Richie. Always. Only strangers call me Richard. Victoria's mother laughed softly. "Your wife is absolutely wonderful, Mr. Bennett. She refused to let anyone else clean the mess." I looked at the wine bottle sitting on the dining table. A French Bordeaux, nearly $500 a bottle. Funny thing about expensive wine. When it's spilled accidentally, people usually panic and apologize. When it's spilled deliberately, people immediately begin explaining why someone else is cleaning it. Then I noticed something else. My wife's left wrist was slightly swollen, and there were faint red marks around it. I walked over and gently helped her to her feet. The moment I touched her arm, she flinched. My blood immediately ran cold. "Eleanor," I asked quietly enough that only she could hear me, "what happened to your face?" She lowered her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, I slipped while carrying the salad bowl." Daniel immediately jumped into the conversation. "Yeah, Dad, she tripped in the kitchen earlier." The lie came too quickly, too smoothly, almost rehearsed. I smiled politely at everyone seated around my dining table. "Would anyone like coffee?" Victoria looked confused. "Actually, we're almost finished with dinner." "Good," I replied calmly. "Then you'll have plenty of time for dessert." I helped my wife into the kitchen without another word. The moment we were alone, I gently held her hands. "Tell me what happened." Her eyes immediately filled with tears. "Please don't do this tonight." "Did Daniel hurt you?" "No." The answer came so quickly that it startled me. "What about Victoria?" Silence. That silence told me more than any words ever could. "Eleanor," she began crying quietly. "She's under a lot of stress, Richard." I closed my eyes for several seconds. After 42 years together, my wife was still protecting people who didn't deserve it. "Did she hit you?" "No." "Then where did the bruise come from?" She wiped her tears with trembling fingers. "It doesn't matter." That sentence broke something inside me. Because whenever a good person says it doesn't matter, what they really mean is, I don't matter enough to make this a problem. I kissed her forehead gently. "It matters to me." Then I asked her something that made her immediately look away. "When was the last time you sat at our dining table?" She didn't answer. "Tonight." "No." "Last week?" Silence. "Eleanor, when?" She finally whispered. "About 3 months ago." 3 months. 3 months of Friday family dinners in my own home, while my wife wasn't allowed to sit beside me at our table. My hands tightened into fists. You see, after I retired, I began spending several evenings each week consulting for our company in Nashville. Daniel and Victoria had convinced Eleanor to let them move into our guest wing temporarily while they saved for their dream home. Temporary had somehow become permanent, and apparently, permanent came with new rules inside my own house. Now I want to ask all of you something. If your own son allowed his spouse to treat your husband or wife this way, who is more guilty? Comment son if you blame Daniel for remaining silent, or comment dill if you believe Victoria is the true villain. Personally, I think silence is simply another form of participation. Before I could ask another question, Victoria walked into the kitchen carrying her empty wine glass. "Oh, Eleanor, could you please refill this for me?" She froze the moment she noticed my expression. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then she laughed nervously. "Oh, goodness. Have I interrupted something?" I slowly turned toward her. "No, Victoria. You actually arrived at exactly the right moment." She smiled awkwardly. "I just wanted another glass of wine." I looked at the wine bottle sitting on my kitchen counter. Then I looked back at my wife. Something wasn't adding up. There were 2 bottles on the dining table, one completely empty, and one unopened, yet somehow my wife was cleaning wine from the floor, while Victoria's glass sat half full. Then I remembered something. 3 years ago, after a burglary scare in our neighborhood, I installed security cameras throughout the entire first floor of our house. The dining room, the kitchen, the hallway, every major room. And unlike everyone else sitting at my dining table that evening, I knew exactly where the footage was stored. I smiled politely and picked up my phone from the kitchen counter. Because one thing I've learned after 68 years of life is this: bruises eventually fade. People's lies don't. I opened the security camera application on my phone and quietly rewound the footage from 2 hours earlier. The entire dining room appeared on my screen. My wife had spent the afternoon preparing dinner for 8 people. She set the table, served every dish and smiled politely, while everyone complimented Victoria for being such a wonderful hostess. Then I saw something that made my stomach turn. When Eleanor finally sat down beside Daniel, Victoria leaned over and whispered something I couldn't hear. My wife immediately stood back up and quietly walked into the kitchen. Seconds later, Victoria deliberately knocked her own wine glass onto the Persian rug and shouted, "Look what you've done." My wife repeatedly apologized, even though she had been standing 6 feet away. Then came the moment that changed everything. Victoria grabbed Eleanor's wrist and pulled her toward the spill so forcefully that she lost her balance and struck her face against the corner of the dining chair. The bruise beneath her eye appeared immediately. "And my son?" He watched everything. He didn't stand up. He didn't defend his mother. He simply lowered his head and continued eating dinner. That hurt me far more than the bruise ever could. Without saying a single word, I connected my phone to the living room television. The entire footage began playing in front of everyone seated at my dining table. The room went silent. Victoria's parents stared at their daughter in complete disbelief. Daniel couldn't even look at the screen. When the video ended, I looked at my son and asked only one question. "When did your mother's dignity become less important than your wife's feelings?" He had no answer. That very night, I asked Daniel and Victoria to pack their belongings and leave my home before sunrise. 42 years ago, my wife stood beside me when I had nothing but a dream and an engagement ring. I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never has to kneel before anyone again. Because the woman who built my family deserves a seat at my table, not a place on my floor.